And to build up those cracks where the lips of that belts there where it cracked off when I was pulling it. Built that up with some brazing rod, TIG brazed it, and got it up into acceptable shape. And I turned it all down on the lathe, got it all matched up, machined up. And I drilled that out and put a helicoil in it. So that's all ready to go. And I've polished this up a little bit, cleaned it up, polished it up. Polished this bore out pretty good here that fits over that tapered shaft. So the next thing to do is to powder coat this. The next thing to do with this is to powder coat it. But before I do that, typically when I do anything, I've got to clean my shop out. I'm trying to get it heated up to do some work before. I wanted to work on my power saw a little bit. I've got the Husqvarna 372 there on the bench, and it's not starting right. I think I need a carburetor kit for it. But one of the things those Husqvarnas do is the fuel line runs down out of the fuel tank and then up through a gap between the fuel tank and the carburetor body, carburetor housing. With those anti-vibration systems they have on those wind up getting pinched in there and wear a hole in them in between. So I had to check to see if that was the problem first. And anyway, I was going to start working on that, but it's just too damn cold out here to do anything. Even with the fire going, I couldn't get it warmed up enough above 40 degrees in here. Actually 32 degrees in here, so everything on the floor was still freezing, and stuff up at head high was about 38 to 40 degrees after getting a fire going all day. So anyway, didn't do much in here. I've got my buckets that we keep outside for waters for the dogs and stuff. I've got those in here. I dumped those out before it started freezing up so that they wouldn't break. Anyway, I've got to get that cleaned up. That'll take me a few minutes, and then dig my powder coating stuff out. I did get a fire going in the stove this morning and got it dried out in here a little bit, got it warmed up to about 65 degrees or so, maybe 70, I don't know, depending on how long the door's open here. But that doesn't really matter for powder coating. It doesn't have anything to do with the powder, applying the powder or fixing it or anything like that. It's not like painting where you need to have it warm. Powder coating doesn't matter. Of course, it gets heated up in the oven. But I've got it started up out here. One more thing that I need to do is to go get a pair of shoes to wear in the shop here while I'm wandering around in it. It has been cold and snowy, and we've got ice built up on the driveway. I've got it plowed out pretty good. It's been raining for the last few days and warmed up. So the pack on there from the snow is still froze down, although it's melting fast. But it is slippery, so running around out here, I'm wearing my cork shoes, logging shoes, to keep from falling down. They're kind of like golf shoes, but they're in a Merrell hiking shoe. So I need to get something that I can walk around in here without chewing up the floor too bad. I've wore those in here before and stepped on my air hose, and now I've got leaks in my air hose. And it's just warmed up and raining now. A little bit ago it was snowing. It looked like a turboprop airplane ran through a flock of snow geese out here. Great big feathery white flakes coming down for a little while, but they didn't stick, fortunately. I've got the shop straightened out enough to do the powder coating now, which means that I just moved all the junk that was in the way here to a pile someplace else where it'll be in the way for some project at a later date. And one of the guys that's watched some of my videos asked about my powder coat process. So I thought while I was powder coating this pulley, I'd go ahead and show the process that I use. Well, this is my first gun that I got. It was just the start coat, hot coat, powder coat system from Eastwood, and it's a relatively cheap thing. It's overpriced, of course, like everything from Eastwood, but it's a lot cheaper than the Columbia coatings or the semi-professional or the high-end amateur ones or whatever that cost $1,000 or so. This, I think when I bought this, it was right around $100, $89 or something like that. Came in a kit with some samples of some powder coat paint, some high temp tape, which is what you use to mask parts that you don't want the powder to stick to or to go onto, and then some of these silicone caps and plugs that you use to cap over things and plug holes that you don't want to get filled up. These are the cups that it comes with for putting paint on, which is they're just basically a plastic bottle, and they screw right onto the gun. This was, I don't know whether they still use these or not, but this was the cans that the paint came in. And then when I ordered new paint, it either came in cans like this or in bottles like this, which you can just use right on the gun. It also came in a container like this. I don't know what this was, a couple of pounds or something like that. 3 pounds maybe. And then I got a 5-pound one, which is a gallon container. It's plastic jug basically. I had it up there on the shelf hiding someplace out of the way. Well, you can also get special powder. You can get all kinds of colors and stuff from Eastwood. And you get sparkly powders to mix in with it, and primers, all kinds of different colors and stuff. They have brilliant colors and regular colors and all kinds of stuff. And then of course you can get powders from all kinds of other people. DuPont makes powders, and PPG makes powders, and other companies make powders. I've been buying my powder lately off of eBay or online from companies, and there are quite a few companies there that sell it, but I have to watch for the price. I also have to watch on shipping, because a lot of the companies won't, some of the companies won't ship to Alaska. Other ones will only ship UPS or FedEx, which sometimes can more than double the cost of the powder. So anyway, I think Powder by the Pound is one of the places that I've been buying it, as well as some other ones. And that comes in bags like this. Well, I've got 2 or 3 bags, and I got some paint buckets, paint cans from the hardware store, and I went ahead and powder coated them the color of the paint, the powder that I've got in the cans. And that works out pretty good. That's a lot less expensive than buying it from Eastwood. So the gun, like I said, is basically pretty cheap. You've got an air hose here, and then you've got an electric cable that comes in. This is the electronics box here, and I think that generates probably a high voltage current, or low current high voltage that it sends out here, and it energizes this. There's a steel pin that comes out through there, and it creates static electricity as it comes through. It comes through this, I don't know whether that's nylon or Teflon or whatever it is, this tube picks up powder out of this bottle, and then there are 3 little tubes inside of there, and as that powder goes through there, it generates a static charge. Same thing as what you get when you walk across a rug and you touch a doorknob, or you rub a balloon on your head, on your hair, and then stick it to the ceiling. And that used to work a lot better when I had hair. But see, these cups just screw on, and you have a certain amount of air that comes out here, which kind of atomizes. This puts that powder in suspension, and then it gets picked up by, just like a siphon gun, parts sprayer or something. Just by Bernoulli's effect, Venturi effect, just gets picked up and pushed through this tube. The cap on here that it screws into is just the cap off one of these bottles. I know that because I broke it once, and I just put a bottle on there and glued it on. I put a bottle cap on there and glued it on. And then this tube is 2-part. It's taped together. That, or I don't know whether it's taped together or pressed together, but that came off and started spewing out powder out around that, so I just stuck it back together and put some duct tape around it to hold it on there. So that's that gun. This is the control box here, plugs into 110. Then you've got a ground cable here that you hook onto whatever parts that you're powder coating. So you're not creating a circuit. This ground is basically just to keep whatever part you're spraying neutral, to bleed off any static that builds up on the part. And according to some of the books that I've read and stuff, ideally you'd run a ground rod down into the ground, just like you do for an electrical circuit, and ground everything to it to make sure all the parts stay neutral, and that way you get a better coating. And you've got a button here you push that energizes the box, and air fitting. You just get air in there, just standard air. So I've got that gun, and to do the powder, you just put a certain amount of powder, about a little less than halfway or so, in this container, in this bottle, and screw it on there, and then you spray it out, and when it starts getting low, you put a little bit more in there. You don't want to put it full, because that way it won't atomize and it'll come out in clumps and stuff, but you just spray that out, and the powder comes out here, and it's charged, and it sticks to whatever part that you're spraying. Now we've got a diverter here, and they've got other diverter valves that you can, or deflectors that you can put on there with holes in them and stuff like that. I've found these work okay for doing sheet metal and broad things, but it's just as well to take it off and use it without it on there if you're doing smaller parts and got to get into crevices and stuff. Although then you got to watch out because those little tubes fall out of there. To change colors, you just take this container off and blow everything out with air, and it blows out and cleans out real easy because it's all powder and dry. And if you run this out and you're gonna, or you dump this out, if you only have one container, you can dump this back into the container you got it out of. They say not to do that, not to reuse it or anything, but I think that's just so they can sell more powder. So everything blows out real easy to clean up. Or you can get multiple containers like this and keep your different colors in each one of them, and then just take the container off, blow out the gun, and put another container on. When I'm doing multiple colors, multiple parts, and I'm doing in different colors, this gets to be kind of a pain to change back and forth several times. As you do, like for instance, one of the powders that I get that I put on is a corrosion resistant primer, and so I put the primer on, cook the part until the primer just starts to cook out a little bit, take it out of the oven, and spray my finish coat on. And if I've got several parts to do, I may have to change back and forth several times. Like some of the colors, you do a color and then you do a clear coat over the top of that, and you'd have to do the same thing. So if you're doing multiple parts and doing that with, it gets to be kind of a hassle changing back and forth. So I've been looking on eBay and picking up used guns when I can. This one is the same kit as that one. It's just a newer one that I just bought here last year off eBay. And I've got two of these, and these are the dual voltage powder coating system, and it's basically the same setup, except they've got the power supply as a switch where you can switch the voltages from a higher voltage to a lower voltage. Supposedly the lower voltage works better if you're putting a second coat on parts, or I don't know, I've read the instructions on it, and I think it's above my pay grade. I haven't really noticed any difference on it. This one is 15 kV and the high one is 25 kV. I mean, logically thinking, you would think that the higher the kilovolts, the higher the static, the better the charge would be, but that's not necessarily the case. You do get a Faraday effect on parts where you have two parts that are close together, or you have machined out pieces, like doing this piece. If you're trying to do inside of here or around and get in on this lip right here, there's a Faraday effect, and the powder will have a tendency to collect on this part and not get in there on that, and you get parts of multiple shapes on it are getting down inside these grooves. That'll happen. You'll get powder on the outer edge of the groove, and it'll all stick to that, but it won't go inside. So that lower voltage is supposed to help with that. And then this tube is a little bit beefier, and it doesn't have it. The hole in it has the electrode out here towards the outer end of it, and it doesn't have those little tubes inside of it to fall out. There is a deflector that goes on that, and I take it off because I wound up using it without it more, so that I can get the powder down into these parts down here. Well, that's my setup. I've got two of these, and that way, like I said, I've got orange in this one, and I guess I wound up with red in this one, although a lot of times I'll do black in it, or I'll do different color, wrinkle black. I think I've got the one up there on the shelf that has primer in it. You can see there's all kinds of different coatings you can get, and I do have wrinkle black. This is another one that I got, is a high temp muffler black, and that's what I did a lot of the exhaust parts on my airplane with, is that. You heat that up to 450 for 20 minutes, and it doesn't completely cure until the part actually gets hot from use, like say in an exhaust manifold or something like that. And of course, just like high temperature paint, it'll burn off. It won't hold up. Even a 1500 degree paint that you buy and stuff to spray paint on doesn't. Even this barbecue high heat temp paint doesn't hold up to real high temp very long. So it's not a ceramic coat. You can get ceramic coats on it, but I really don't know much about that. Now the powder, it's a powder. It comes dry. It's real fine. What it is real fine ground up plastic chips basically, and you're supposed to keep it dry. It does absorb moisture from the air. Well, what I do is I take this stuff and measure it out. I'll put a funnel in my cup, and then I'll spoon it out with a tablespoon here and into this little colander and grind it up if I've got any lumps or anything like that in there, and put it back in there instead of throwing it away. It's just too hard for me to get stuff here. It's too expensive and too hard to get, so I use everything I can. There are a lot of guys will set up a little spray booth with a fan in it and filters and everything to suck the air in, and a clean room and all that kind of stuff, and I don't have a place to set that up, and I don't want to take the time to do it right now. Oh, I just take and hang the stuff up outside in the outer part of the shop and spray it out there, and then stick it in the oven, and then I put everything away when I'm done. The biggest thing here is finding different ways to support this stuff. Now it's real easy to support it if you're going to have one side that's not going to be coated, because you just lay it down like that and spray all around it, and then lay it down in the oven, or put it on a cookie sheet or something and slide it in the oven. But you can't do one side and then turn it over and do the other side, because the side that you did then will get overheated and it'll stick when you put it in there. So you've got to find a way to support this somehow. I've made jigs for different things to support them, like the flywheel out there. When I painted it, I made a jig that suspended it up off the floor, off the ground, so I could do both sides of it. I've done wheels before where I've made a stand for it where I could hold it up in the air and stick it in the oven and get all the way around it. For this, I thought I could machine out something on the lathe to stick in here to hold that on, to stick it on a platform and stuff, but that's kind of overthinking that. What I did before was just take a piece of welding rod and stick through these holes and hang it from the oven rack that goes in the oven. So you can buy all kinds of hangers and stuff for these things. All kinds of people have that for sale, but basically it's just bent wire. I just take welding rod and bend it up as necessary. So this is one that I did to do a bunch of nuts and stuff or washers on, where I could stick them all on here and keep them separated. Hang this up for my oven rack, spray these and stick them in the oven. That way I wasn't making individual hangers for each one of the pieces. Now it doesn't take much air for this. 5 pounds of air is more than enough. It just puffs out. If you have too much air in there, it just blows it off of whatever parts you're on. So I set my air regulator down to nothing and then bring it up until it just barely shows. You do need dry air and clean air, so you got to use an air hose just like you would for painting. It's not one that you use for oiling tools and stuff in. It's got to be dry and clean. So I've got a system of filters and dryers on here, and then I've got a desiccant dryer on here that I put that blue silica gel desiccant in and dry the air for that. You get moisture in there and you get blisters in the paint and the powder and stuff, and it comes off and whatnot. So you've got to have the air perfectly dry. Well, just like painting, cleanliness is not an important thing. It's the most important thing that you can do here for getting the coating to stick on there. Now I've used lacquer thinner for years painting cars and parts and things like that, just cleaning them up and then spraying them with Krylon or spraying with my spray guns using the acrylic enamel or polyurethane or anything else. I went to paint school 100 years ago when PPG was Delstar, or not Delstar, Ditzler, and I learned that it's better to clean this stuff, get all the waxes and everything else, oils and stuff off of things, and they sell this acrylic clean, and there's other prep sols that you can get, paint prep sols that you can get that clean. I found out that lacquer thinner is dirty. It leaves an oily residue on parts and stuff, and when I was using it, when I first started powder coating, and I would clean things up, and no matter how hard I washed them with lacquer thinner, I wouldn't get a good result on there. I'd get pimples and stuff like that in it, orange peel and whatnot. So now I clean all the parts with acrylic clean, wash them down real good with that before I paint them. I use different methods for cleaning the material depending on what it is. I've used electrolysis before for some thin parts and stuff to get the rust and paint and stuff off. A paint remover, sandblast is kind of one of my favorite ones. Oh, that's what I did with this part, is sandblasted it, and of course I polished it back up again when I got done. So anyway, cleanliness is next to godliness on that, and acrylic clean, I guess you can use acetone if you use virgin acetone or MEK, something like that, but lacquer thinner just doesn't work for a cleaner under paint, especially not powder coat. So I've got holes in here, these bigger holes, it's fine if I get powder coat down in those. These threaded holes, I don't necessarily want powder coat in those threads. So if you have holes like that you don't want it in, you get these little plugs and stick in there in those holes. And I don't want paint on this surface here. This surface goes on that tapered shaft that comes off of the crankshaft, or the tapered shaft that goes over it on the flywheel. So I don't want paint in here. So there's different ways you could do that. Of course, you could just plug that off with a big plug. But I've got this high temperature tape. I need to clean it up. It's gotten dusty sitting on the shelf. But I'll take that tape and tape this section off here. Now this outer portion, it'd be a good idea to get powder coat on it because that's exposed and that'll rust. So that's the next step, is to prep all my parts there. Figure out my hanger system and stuff for this, and prep that part and get it ready to coat, and get my powder that I want, my gun that I want, all set up. Now the powder is not hazardous. It's a good idea to use a dust mask when you're powder coating, but you don't need a respirator or anything like that because it's just dust. It's less hazardous than the dust you breathe when you're driving down a dirt road. And I wear rubber gloves or nitrile gloves, not to protect my fingers from this stuff, but to keep my finger oils and stuff off of everything, to keep everything pristine, to keep it all clean. I decided to go ahead and do this tonight. I got everything all set up. The shop was warmed up and I had everything all fixed up in there. I got the part cleaned up and everything. Got my gun out and all set up with the powder in it, and I needed, this is my setup for spraying in this particular instance. That's the oven rack, and this you can see it's all orange. I've been using it quite a bit for different things. In fact, to the point where I run safety wire, I think that's 20,000 safety wire, and tie a lot of the little parts on with it, and I run the wire and tie it all in together and bring it over to tie my ground into, because I don't have a good ground path through this rack anymore because of all of the powder on it. So there's the pulley. I cleaned it all up with acrylic clean, and I put the high-tip tape in there to mask off that's where that sleeve goes on there. I was going to take some silicone plugs and plug these threaded holes on the threaded ends of them, but I found some 1/4-inch short bolts instead that I threaded in there, and then I took a piece of tie wire and wrapped around 2 of those bolts and made a loop out of it and have it up there. And then I washed everything all down again with acrylicline and hung it up out here. One of the things I've started doing is taking a torch like this and heating everything up to dry it out, because it helps evaporate off the acrylicline faster, and everything around here is damp anyway, so it helps get the moisture off of it. And it doesn't hurt anything to heat this up a little bit. Now, a regular piece you don't necessarily need to, but this is a casting, and castings are dirty. They're porous and they've got oil and crap down in them. And when you powder coat them and stick them in the oven, a lot of times those pores start bleeding out that junk that's in there, and it'll make the powder. You'll get pinpricks in it and pimples and stuff in it from that. So it actually wouldn't have hurt anything to take this thing and stick it in the oven for a few minutes, and that would make the powder stick on it better as it goes into some of these grooves and stuff on here, and get down in those grooves better. I'm just going to go ahead and heat it up with a torch a little bit here and get it dry, get the moisture off of it. We got probably 80% or 90, probably 100% moisture in the air here tonight, because it's been raining all day long and snowing and raining. So there's always moisture in the air here. So this will help dry the moisture off of that. I'll run this grounding strap down, clip down in there and hook it onto that tie wrap, or that wire tie that I made up. I've got just a little bit of air coming out of there. I'm going to do this first with the deflector on it and stuff, and just spray it. Yeah, it's getting in there good. That's getting into all those grooves and everything. You don't really need to spray every square inch of it, because it gets around there and the static electricity pulls it in on that part. But I do have to get around the back side of it here and get up in there into those grooves. I'm going to take that grounding strap off there. I've got to ground it out first, the electrode. I'm not taking the grounding strap off, I'm taking the deflector off. So now you see, without the deflector on there, that shoots that in. It gets in those tighter spots better. But you don't want to just puff it on there, otherwise it just blows it off. Well, then I just take that oven rack off of there and go stick it in the oven. Alright, it's only been about 5 minutes and that thing is starting to get shiny, so I can start the timer on that. Now that helped by heating that up ahead of time. If it hadn't been heated up first, it probably wouldn't get shiny this fast, but we'll let that in there and set the timer now for 20 minutes, and then shut that stove off and open that up so it'll cool off. And the nice thing about the powder coat is once it cools off, it's as hard as it's ever going to get. It's ready to use. Unlike paint that might take several days or weeks before it ever gets hard enough to really use. Now, the dinner bell rang just about the time that thing started shining up, so it was pretty easy going in the house and having dinner and let that cook for 20 minutes. Well, that's one of the pockets that was in there from the welding. Otherwise it looks pretty good. It smoothed out these divots in here pretty nice where it filled in. I'd sanded those down smooth anyway, but that filled those in pretty good. So that thing looks pretty good now. I let it, like I said, I let it cook for 20 minutes while I was having dinner, and then I come out, turned it off, and then just left it in the oven to cool off. It took a while to cool off. There it is. It's a little bit thin in there in the bottoms of those grooves. As I said, that gets that Faraday effect in there, and that paint powder doesn't go in there very good, but mostly it looks pretty good. It's just on that one side. So anyway, hopefully that'll work. I'll have to get some new bolts tomorrow. I broke a couple of the ones that I had in there, so I'll get some new bolts tomorrow and put that on. That should keep it from rusting up like it did before, at least for as long as I need it. Oh, I get this pulley put back on here now, get it out of the way. I actually decided to do this the professional way, the right way. I went and found the book and looked up what the torque's supposed to be on these, and it said 9 foot-pounds. I'm going to just do these equally and pull that on there. 108 inch-pounds would be 9 foot-pounds, and of course I need to tighten these up all the way around. Each one pulls in a little bit. So there's 100 inch-pounds. I took this pulley and just stuck it in the oven for an hour or so, set at about 100 degrees, or as low as that oven would go. So I'd put some corrosion block spray on there, like the powdercoat, but just a spray on that shaft to keep it from corroding. Well, I got some paint thinner, some terps actually, and cleaned that shaft off, and then got a little bit of fine grade sandpaper 400. There was a little bit of rust on there. I polished that shaft up, and then I wiped both surfaces with a little bit of Marvel Mystery Oil. And I put powdercoat in all the holes here and gooped up these bolts real good. I put them in the threaded holes in here, in this flywheel, and then in these holes. Now these holes here are the ones that are threaded on the back side of the pulley that you can pull these bolts out to use to push that pulley off of there. Anyway, I put powdercoat on all of those, some corrosion block, and then down in the holes. And it's cold, it was stiff, so it was hard to get going. I put my heat gun on it for a little while, but my heat gun is pretty much shot. I used it to form that windshield for the airplane on, and it pretty much crapped out while I was trying to heat this up. But anyway, I got it enough where I got powdercoat on everything. And of course this was warm and it melted and ran down through those holes. That is on there. Then I wiped out the shaft, the tapered shaft, with some Marvel Mystery Oil, and inside of the pulley there, the tapered portion of that, I wiped it out with Marvel Mystery Oil. Now back in the, I think it was in the 30s, they were developing the engines and stuff, and running race cars and racing airplanes and stuff like that. And there was an engineer, a guy that was running race cars, named Lenke, I think his name was. I can't remember exactly, but they had a lot of trouble with sticking valves and stuff on those engines because of the fuel they had and the metallurgy they had on the engines, and they had a lot of sticking valves. And this guy developed a compound, or a lubricant, to put in the oil to help prevent sticking valves. And they called it Lenkite. Well, basically that was the start of these things. Lenkite now has come out again, and they call it AvBlend, and it's an additive you can add to fuel or oil in airplane engines. Basically Marvel Mystery Oil and Croil are the same thing. They're a real light oil. The theory behind that is the size of the molecules in the oil is small enough that it'll penetrate the small pores and stuff in the steel, in the metal, whereas regular lubricating engine oil has long chains on it, and it forms a barrier by pressure between the two different metals when they come in contact. The more pressure there is there, the more that lubricant sticks in there, but as it sits, then that stuff runs off and it doesn't penetrate the pores. So the Lenkite, Marvel Mystery Oil, Croil, the molecules are supposedly small enough in there that they'll penetrate the pores of the metal and they won't run off like regular oil will. Basically, they're all the same thing. It's basically pretty much like kerosene or coal oil, something like that, with some additives in it. They put anise oil in it to make it smell good. Basically, anise oil is used as a base in a lot of lures and stuff for trapping and perfumes and all kinds of stuff, and that's what gives it that sweet smell. Yeah, I don't know whether it adds anything to the properties of it or not, but it gives it that smell that makes people want to use it. So anyway, that thing is on there. It's torqued down. Well, that's one more thing on portion of that engine that's done.